Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining me and us. We've got a great conversation to have here this evening. I'm really looking forward to, and something that not a conversation we do so much in person, sort of bridging across architecture and property. So our topic today is beautiful sustainable architecture and the East London property market. My name is Amy Frearson. I'm a journalist. I write about architecture and design. Some of you may know me as editor-at-large for Dezeen. I also have a real kind of interest in residential architecture. I wrote a book about co-living called All Together Now, The Co-Living and Co-Working Revolution. And then I think it's probably also relevant to add, for the context of this talk, I'm also a Walthamstow property owner, living in a flat in the Stow Brothers neighbourhood for the past 9 years. So I'm going to introduce you all to our panel of speakers. So we've got Daniel Rees of Rees Architects, founder and director. And then I have Kenny and Andrew Goad, who are the founders and directors of the Stow Brothers. In a second, I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a little bit more detail. But I think just to kind of kick things off, I thought it might be nice to sort of, I guess, start to think a little bit about the topic and the things we're going to sort of talk about today. And I think one of the things we sort of identified when we were thinking about this conversation is this idea of kind of marrying together the idea of good design with the idea of good investment, and understanding the best way to sort of approach a home extension or renovation project in terms of providing value, both in terms of quality of life and also in terms of, financial value if and when you decide to sell. And sort of what are the hurdles and what are the opportunities? And we're sort of going to go through a few of the kind of topics, which is sort of the architecture and design process, planning applications, the build and construction stage, cost and budget considerations, and resale value of the property. So Daniel, I'm going to kind of come to you first.
Okay.
Maybe you can introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit more about yourself and your practice.
Yeah, so we're Rees Architects. You probably see if you look on our website that we focus on renovations of homes, extensions, new builds. We mainly focus around building a home for someone to live in maybe 10 years, maybe their whole life, but designing everything around them. And I think this conversation is really good because it's more talking about how we can resell and look at things as well, but we mainly design for the person and what they want it to be. I've studied in London and started to practice 10 years ago, and it's really come to this point now of just working on people's homes, and I really enjoy and love it. We focus on the exteriors, but we also do the interiors as well. We go really down to the detail of the kitchens. We design the furniture as well as the architecture. So we kind of encompass everything in one go, and we also project manage a lot of our jobs as well. So
fantastic. And to give a little bit of colour to that, maybe you can talk about one or two projects, maybe just give a little bit of an overview of like maybe some sort of recent projects you've worked on and what they kind of involved, just to give us a bit of a flavour.
Yeah, there's one that just popped up there on the screen, which is probably one of my favourites recently. It was just a loft extension in Leytonstone. But the key on that one was the client was a designer. He was in the marketing industry, and he really got the ethos of what we were trying to do. So we're not having to fight against him with our ideas. He really understood what we're trying to do with the design, and if anything, he just let us do what we wanted in some respects because he wanted to really kind of embrace that. So that was a small loft extension. I think the value at the beginning was about 70, it went up to maybe 100. So not a huge scale, but really nice details in there, and using materials that you might not use on the facade and inside. So that one for me was probably the most interesting recently.
And when you say materials, what were those materials? Maybe you can give us a little bit of an indication.
So, I mean, a lot of people in East London now use plywood, but we use plywood for a lot of the interiors. But we used an underlay of a flooring, which is called Regupol. It's recycled rubber, and it's there to have an acoustic separation when you've got a floor on top of another habitable room below. I just really loved it. It's a recycled material, it's chip-ins, and we actually put it on the walls. So it was really cheap. I think it was like £3 a square metre. Looked really cool, and it also gave an acoustics to the room as well. So that kind of thing is something that we managed to do in that project that we haven't done before. There's a picture of it there. So
Interesting. Or maybe we can delve a little bit more into things like that later. And guys, Kenny, Andrew, maybe you can, goodness me, maybe you can introduce yourselves to the audience and maybe tell us a little bit about sort of background for those. I'm sure most of people here do know the Stow brothers, but for those that maybe don't or who sort of are tuning in on Instagram, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your story.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks for everyone for coming, firstly. We were a local estate agent in Walthamstow. That was our first office. Kenny and I have worked there for many, many years. We started the business mainly because we wanted to provide our community with an estate agent they could be proud of. We wanted to be the antithesis of traditional estate agents and wanted to be, we initially set out just for people just to like us. You know, estate agents haven't got the best reputation. We wanted to be polite, we wanted to help, we wanted to be assertive. So that was really the beginning of it all, and it's evolved since then, and we've kind of really started to formulate the reason why we exist, and it's accelerated from there. So providing our community with a service they can be proud of is really important for us, and I think estate agents were perceived in the past, maybe some still are, to be more of a leech on their community. We wanted to be something positive and bring a property service that they could be proud of.
I mean, I've worked in East London for many years, and actually there's a story behind me and Andrew becoming estate agents. You know, we did start off and have the idea to do something ourselves one day. Andrew's a little bit older than me, so I got into the industry because of him, and even then it was, let's do this, Kenny, because you know we can do something with this and we can make a bit of a difference and change the industry. And I think being industry disruptors is something that we think about and something we want to continue doing. Even though now we're established, I think it's really important for us that we continue to push the envelope and try to shake up the industry wherever we can.
Continue being creative, thinking outside the box. Those are the challenges that we kind of face most days. And
and while doing it, also having appreciation for good design, and being authentic with that and understanding the design process, because then we're better placed to sell it to people.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of key, and that's sort of what sort of set Stow Brothers apart for me, which is, you know, there are plenty of other estate agents who know their markets. There are also design-led platforms that kind of really come at this from sort of design angle, but maybe aren't actually so good at actually being estate agents as well. And it seemed like you guys sort of married the two together. Does that always fit? Like, is it possible to always do both, or does it?
We want to sell cool homes, you know, and that's ultimately what it's about. And I think someone gave us some feedback really early on, and they said, do you guys do you provide interior design? Do you dress these homes? We were like, no, we don't. And these homes had a certain feel, a certain way of being presented, and I think it was our market. You know, we understood there was a market for what we were trying to offer, and people's homes were quite similar, and they're not interior designed. They're just, I think, on trend. I think that's.
Yeah. And you sort of touched on before that you kind of, you know, wanted to be an estate agent that's like giving back to community and, you know, really sort of supporting local communities. Yeah. How exactly do you do that?
We have a department within Stow Brothers called the Stow Fund. And within that fund, we help local organisations with finance, help, design. We went to Epping Forest as a good example. We got our stuff. Some of them weren't too happy about it, but there were coppices for the day where they helped Epping Forest coppicers, I think you call them, to chop down trees, and and pick up rubbish. We really just wanted to be an active part of it, and you know, and not just say it. We wanted to do it in our actions as well.
Let's roll into a bigger conversation here. And actually, my first question is going to be for you two, really, which is for the average homeowner or prospective homeowner, How much should they be thinking about architecture and design? Like, what value does it bring them?
Well, I think if somebody already owns their home, and from my experience of going in to see lots of people at the first stages of their ideas of renovation, is to improve their quality of life. I think we all spend so much time at home, especially now where most of my peer group are working 2 to 3 days at home. We're spending more time at home, and having a space that you feel comfortable in, and a space that's considered, and also that is designed for you personally, is fantastic for you, but it also will be transferable for when you come to sell, because somebody else would also hopefully appreciate that space and the time that you've put into it.
I think it's a good point. I think because we get invited in at the beginning of people's property journey, I think there's this battle between, am I doing this for someone else or should I do it for myself? And that is a conversation we have with people. It's very common. And our advice is that it's got to be right for you and your family. That's the kind of number one priority. And to do work with the idea that someone else is going to appreciate it, I think is the wrong psychology in entering into any significant building work.
Do you ever get it where you go into a house and you go in and they're kind of proud of it, but you're like, why did you do that? Yeah. And it's like, really simple thing, but because they didn't think about the bigger picture to start with, because they didn't have a designer or an architect on board, they've kind of got down to a path where that was what happened, and
but
just a little bit of thought.
Absolutely, but it's also really important to be able to have a professional that you can talk that
Spot
through
on.
with,
Yeah.
and someone to give you ideas, nuggets, and you think, I didn't think about that. Or actually, I do use the space in this way, or actually, it's really useful for me. But sometimes, if you're just talking to one other person, to your partner or on your own, it's very difficult to have that person to bounce off of, and you may have missed certain things. Yeah.
I think from our perspective, the homes that are the most popular, the ones that we find can break records, from a financial sense, are the ones that are people's homes. Not the ones that have been developed by a property developer that, they had their place, in the property market, but it's people's homes when they go around, and it's that feeling that someone gets when they walk into that home. That to recreate that is kind of the utmost important if you want to make sure that you're gonna increase the desirability of your home.
But you can only really get that through authenticity.
Exactly.
You can't.
You've got to be authentic, and you can't do it for someone else. I think that's what I'm getting at. You've got to do it for yourself, and that's.
Yeah, and Dan, sort of from your perspective, I mean, for people sort of that are, starting a kind of a renovation project or an extension project, or like at the sort of start of that kind of journey, how. I think a lot of people think of architects as maybe when they think in sort of bigger projects like museums, they maybe think, the architect is through the process. But when it comes to their home, people think an architect maybe just comes in, does them some drawings and then, goes away again. And how soon should people be engaging an architect in the process? And, what kind of services can you provide? Like, is there, how much of a sort of problem solving, hands-on can you be there for?
I think what we always do is the initial thing is the brief. So people come to us, they might have vastly different ideas of what a brief is. It might be, we want the fridge freezer there. Other people might be, I have no idea what to do in my house, I know, but I want it to be bigger. So what we do is straight away is talk about how they live. So how big is your dining room table? How many people do you ever come around? What pets have you got? How do you use your house? Do you work from a dining room table? Do you want a dedicated space? And then we can get stuff out of them that they might not have thought about the house and how it works. So that's probably the key point, is the brief has to be really strong at the beginning. Then the design just leads on from that, and it's really good. And I would say if you're going to get an architect involved and you're buying a new property, get them to look at it before you purchase it, because they'll probably see stuff in it that you might not even know about.
I think that's really important. Sorry, Ken, go on.
Well, I think in our experience, it is, could be a little bit more contentious, but having an architect look at a property before you buy it, or even a builder, I think has more value than maybe getting a surveyor in at certain times. I think surveyors do have their place, don't get me wrong, but there are things that architects will pick up and notice that perhaps a surveyor won't, or that will say there isn't a problem that someone else will say it is, and the same with the builder, and actually be able to give you real costs of how much something is to fix. And I think that's actually a really good point.
Yeah, most people will come for the first kind of meeting for free if they're gonna engage with you, and you're kind of looking at this house in real detail. As long as you can agree that they're going to pay your fees, or they're like generally happy with your fee, then they'll come down and have a look at the house with you and give you a bit of guidance. I would say.
It's in your interest, so that you might find something there that might give you a bit of a design thread.
That's the
point. Actually, that's a bit of you can lead on something there, make it.
And sometimes you see a house and you're like, this really isn't fit for you. That other one that you just saw is, so you can kind of give them a bit more of a steer as well.
Yeah. And I mean, this is someone maybe you might just say always us, but how do you find how do people find the right architects for their projects? Is it good to sort of shop around a little bit or consult with a few people, or like what are the questions that people should be asking when they're trying to work out whether an architect is right for them?
I only really know from my experience, but normally when people come to me with a project, they might be recommended by someone else who's used it before. They might see us on a magazine. They might see us, they might find us on some website. What I always say is, we'll do a very good job, but does our design aesthetic fit what you want? And if we're going to be arguing about aesthetic the whole way through, then maybe find an architect that fits your aesthetic and go with them. I think as long as they're a good architect and reputable architect, you're going to get a good surface, because we're all managed in that way, and we're all taught that way. So I don't think you're going to find a dishonest architect. I think you just need to work with them rather than against them from the beginning.
Relationship.
I was going to say, is that sort of like is getting along almost sometimes the more important thing, feeling like you're on the same page?
Really
in the way
important.
That you think?
Yeah, really important, because some of the projects we do might last 2 years. So you don't want to be working with someone for 2 years and not get along with them. So
yeah,
I suppose it's probably the same in thinking about an estate agent as well. It's can I work with this person? Because 2 years, it could be a year buying or selling a house. Hopefully not. But it can be
awful.
But it can be. Do we believe in the same things? I think that's crucial.
Well, some people will just, I guess anyway, but some people as an estate agent will just sell their thing on them valuing your house higher. So do you go for them, or do you go for the person that you trust?
That's the thing. You should never really go with estate agent based on what they value the house at solely. I mean, it's a factor, of course, but it's because you can work the price out together, and essentially it's can we work together? Is this person going to represent me in the right way? Do they get my house? Do they understand the design? Do they understand the effort that I've put into it? And are they going to be able to communicate that to an audience?
We were speaking earlier, and we said, actually you're selling a lifestyle sometimes with these houses that are really well designed. People want to buy it because they can see themselves living in that house and using it. And if the estate agent can represent that and show it, I think that's really important. And it's not just the numbers.
Absolutely. It's an emotional process. Yeah. And I think we all have to kind of remember that and understand that. It brings out the worst in people, and the best and the worst in people. And, when you go through that process, it's really important to understand that the relationships within it are crucial for it to be a success or not. Without those relationships, without you understand whether you can work with someone or not, it could really end in tears.
I can imagine. Yeah. And then when it comes to sort of planning work on properties, I mean, obviously for you guys, you're probably having those conversations with people at the early stages when they're sort of buying properties with what kind of ideas of work in mind. What are the things, and this is probably a question for both of you, maybe more for you, Dan, but what are the kind of key considerations that people need to sort of take into account, when they're kind of planning work on their property? Are there sort of unforeseen costs or specific kind of considerations that people maybe don't take into account when they're, budgeting and working out whether they can afford to do it?
There's a big one. We were just talking about it downstairs, weren't we, Dan? Yeah. Being in the property is a big one, I think. Deciding whether you're going to go through those extensive works and live in that property. That's a big decision you've got to make early on. And me and Dan were talking downstairs, and I personally have experienced being through a development while living there and not being there was a much more pleasant experience. And I think people may think that, oh, actually the cost attributed to not being in that building while the work is going on, you know, you might think actually it may not be worthwhile. But actually, if you actually really break it down and work it out, you know, the builder may be a year when you're not there, but it may be 18 months while you're there, and all those added time frame and that cost, it just starts to spiral. So that, I think that's a big decision that someone should make, whether you can breaking those costs down.
What about living in it initially to get a feel for the house and to understand?
No, just during the construction phase. Some people try and live in the house where it's being renovated, and you know, scrabble around like, oh, we've got a little kitchen upstairs, and it just slows down the builder. He has to make sure it's safe, cutting off the water, electric. It kind of doubles the time that he's there, which means it's more expensive. And do you actually save any money? And is it a nice place to like have your family or live for 6 months or a year or whatever it is? So
and then maybe
I think it's a really important thing to think about.
Make different decisions during the process, based on the fact you just want to get it done. Cause it's,
that as well,
and maybe sacrifice some design.
So that's really.
Yeah, we did it once, and my wife said never again. So she goes, if we do it again, then I will do it, but we're not going to be living there. So I had no option, basically.
Yeah. And Kenny, I want to circle back to what you sort of were just mentioning a minute ago, because I think that's super interesting. Is like that's something you often advise people to sort of live in a property for a little while first to get a sort of feel for how you know, maybe what you think you're going to do might change.
Yeah, I think if you're going to embark on a big project on a house and spend, you know, considerable amount of time and money, then I think it's best that you understand the house, get a feel for the light, the sound, the acoustics. How do I use this space? Am I happy with this space? Do I need to do anything to this before you embark on it? Because, you know, thinking about sustainability a little bit, if there's something, areas of the house you don't necessarily need to touch, then don't touch them. Focus that time and energy on somewhere else. So yeah, that would be my advice.
We've done both, and they've both got good merits to it. I think understanding the house, like we can see where the light's going to come and the sun and how the angles are going to work, but knowing your neighbours, knowing what the road's like, knowing, you know, these things are intrinsic with living in the house for quite a while. So I think that's quite important. But then you've got the thing where maybe you can stay in your own old house while the other one's being renovated, is also a good thing as well. And you've got a time period where you haven't got the stamp duty of two homes.
Neighbours is the big one as well. We haven't talked to that. Neighbours is a big one.
Neighbours is huge, especially if you have to get party wall agreement.
Party wall agreement.
And I'm guessing, I mean, maybe not everyone in the audience knows what a party wall agreement is, or like what actually has to happen. Then maybe you can kind of explain that.
So party wall agreement is essentially when you need to alter anything on the boundary. So it could be the wall that separates between you and your neighbour that you share. It could be a fence. It could be a number of different things that essentially are in ownership of you and the neighbour.
And there can be loads, right? It may not just be like a neighbour on either side. Like sometimes there are sort of 6, 7, 8 party wall agreements, or sort of.
It can be if you're living in a house and then next door split into 2 flats. You've got the 2 owners, and then maybe the freeholder of the building. So you've got 3, and then maybe you got 1 on the other side as well. So there's a lot of party wall agreements that you'd need to get. And they're good in some ways because they can, in the agreement, you can talk about access to actually building your property, and you can get agreements of going on their land and using it. But they can also be a nightmare in the fact that 3 surveyors can get involved, and the person doing the development will have to pay the fees for all those surveyors.
And what sort of costs can that add?
I mean, it could be if someone agrees on a notice, it could be a few £100s, but we've had it going to tens of thousands. Yeah, where you've got lots of neighbours and
surveyors will look on the portal, the planning portals, and they'll look up the portal and they'll call the individuals and they'll pitch for work. So my advice: take a big bottle of wine, flowers next door. You know, really get to know your neighbours, really get friendly. You know, really understand and be honest with them and tell them what your plans are. And I think that's super important.
And that kind of rule maybe extends to sort of other things as well, right? I mean, say you're living in a conservation area and you're kind of planning work, and you know you want to get your neighbours on side. being friendly early and being kind of engaging them and sort of telling them about what you're planning rather than waiting for them to have the see the planning application right is often a great thing to do.
Especially if you just bought a house and then you're going to renovate it and then move in, people can get really like, who are these people moving in next door? Like, and they've never seen you, and then you've done this big project and they're already annoyed by you when you move in because you made noise for 6 months. You know,
It comes back to relationships.
take 'em
What
some
I was saying
cakes.
at the start, it can't be faceless, can it? You have to have a relationship.
And broadly thinking about budgeting, I mean, without getting, I don't want to get us sort of too sort of in depth of the details of kind of planning projects in terms of planning costs, but do you kind of have a sort of a general kind of strategy approach that you advise clients when you're sort of first starting to think about whether something's affordable or where to spend the money?
Yeah, we've got a calculator that we use that's based on our last 20 projects, which gives us a good idea of the costs of a project. It's really rough. It's based on square meter rates, but we can fine tune it for the area, the type of build you're doing. But really, the only way to get a good estimate is a bit of a QS, a quantity surveyor. So they can do quite a good cost plan at the beginning. It's a few £100, maybe £1,000. Whereas if you get a builder on board and bring them in, they just want to get their foot in the door. So they'll tell you a price, and then, you know, and then that price will be nowhere near what you want to do. And they're like, oh, you want windows? I didn't realise you want windows. So, you know, it's all these things that they'll do that are really, you know, it's not the right way to go. So getting the professionals involved to talk about cost at the beginning is super important.
And do you normally advise a certain sort of percentage for a contingency?
100%, yeah.
100% of your budget?
Sometimes. Yeah.
I mean, on average, our ones have been 12% contingency. So, but that can really vary on the site. If it's a really old house, maybe it's got more problems that you don't know about until you start opening up walls. But we can advise on what that's going to be.
Yeah, and a question for you guys, I guess, when you're sort of thinking about budgeting, especially if you're thinking you're in a property that you may not be your forever home as such, is there sort of, do you guys tend to advise like a sort of a price cap? You know, like, is there sort of, when people are kind of renovating extended, would you ever suggest like, you know, this is maybe as much as a property in this particular location or this type of property's worth to consider, or do you kind of not stay away from that?
It's very difficult because how can you value for something in the future? You know, the only thing that we can be certain on is what we feel and what we have sold in today's market today. Yeah. So what we would do in a situation like that is try to find the most current comparables that match up to the design and say, well, look, theoretically, if you did this and it was done tomorrow and you wanted to sell it tomorrow, we feel that it would probably be around this level of the house that we sold maybe, you know, around the corner that was similar design. But then you fast forward the clock a year, 2 years, the market may have changed anyway. So it's very difficult to really talk about that.
We were saying downstairs as well, if you're going to live in a house for 5 years and you go cheap, so you're going to, right, okay, we're going to budget because it fits in 5 years' time, you know, the kitchen might start falling apart because you've gone too cheap on it, and then you have to spend more money before you sell it. So you have to really think about, well, am I going to cut back the budget and sell it, or am I going to live in it? And is the wear and tear going to need, you know, you could spend a little bit more now and make sure that in 5 years' time it's still going to be a good quality.
Yeah, and I think what I'm starting to notice more and more is that, you know, people are appreciating good design more now and understand it more and are more educated on it. So, you know, I'm not saying to people you should throw caution to the wind if you're going to move out, you know, in 5 or 6 years, but I feel like you could be freer with the budget and not be so concerned about the market. And also, if it improves your quality of life, then, hey, look, that's more important, you know, for some people is, than what you might come to sell it for in 5 years' time.
Yeah, I said to Dan, I went round to someone's house once. They invited me round, and so we want to do some work. I said, okay, great. And he goes, I just want to see what kind of value it would add, Andrew. And I said, well, what are you planning on doing? It's a ground floor WC. Understood. And I was like, okay. So how much do you think it will add? How much value do you think it will add? I was like, you know, it's
you know, add the square footage. But
Yeah,
I mean,
it's interesting, and it's little things like front doors, and first floor bathroom. So we get these questions asked a lot, and I think it really highlights the psychology. And I think the psychology in those situations is probably incorrect. And I think you need to be doing it for yourself. And in 5 years' time, the money that you spent, normally, if you look at history, you will recoup what you've invested.
hopefully, we'll lose money.
Yeah, hopefully you won't lose.
Yeah, but it all comes really down to what your long-term plans are. If it's going to be 10 years, 15 years, well then.
Yeah. Have you guys ever had a sort of an example of a property where someone's gone to town, but with a lot of love, and it's maybe you think, like, oh, maybe that was a bit too much when you've come to sell it, or is that sort of do you tend to feel that if someone's put their heart and soul into something, the result's usually good?
Usually, like I said, because I think the market has, people understand and appreciate it. But you do get instances where people do the work and completely fall out over it. And you're now sitting back around their house saying, we did all this work, we're sitting in this beautiful house, but we're getting divorced and we need to sell it. It's like, oh, gee, what a shame. That does happen. That's happened to me a couple of times. And that, in those instances, the house has always, luckily, done well and recouped the costs.
Yeah. I think we talk about creativity and how desirable that is from a selling perspective, but some people get too creative sometimes. And, so there is, it's nice to think outside the box, but, that box isn't massive. There has to be some, there has to be some understanding of how people live. And, I've experienced it before where people just, they put a sauna in their house. And there's like a Victorian house, and it was lovely. But they spent a lot of money on the sauna, and and then
not everybody wants a sauna.
No, unfortunately, they didn't recoup the funds. So that's just an example that not everyone's going to want a sauna in a Victorian house.
I think there's a big thing of Pinterest as well, and people going on Pinterest and finding 5 things that they like and then putting it in every room with no coherence about how it works with the rest of the house. And just because it's in vogue now doesn't mean that when you go to sell it, it's going to be in fashion anymore. And do you want to make the architecture that unsustainable that you have to rip it out in 5 years' time as well? So I think what we try and do in particular is let the architecture sit in the background, so your artwork and your furniture and stuff can be changed over time, but the building doesn't need to be changed. And I think thinking about the building, exactly, try and make it timeless. And that doesn't mean, oh, I'm going to copy and paste something that was done 50 years ago. It means like really considering the design, how the light comes in, how does it function, like all these things are really important.
Yeah, do you think that sort of the world of Pinterest has kind of slightly detached people from understanding why decisions are made? I mean, I think like the best example I think that comes to mind sort of is the idea that, I don't know, maybe when you were sort of working with your kind of partition wall, you've got a stud wall and you think, oh, there's a little gap there, maybe I'll put like a niche in and put a shelf in. And then you see projects where someone's thought maybe, oh, that looks really good, I want that in my place, but they've kind of had to...
Yeah, and they like cram it in there.
Yeah, rather than making the most of space, have actually like lost space as a result of trying to kind of get in this particular scene that they saw that without really understanding why it was there.
Yeah, there's so many things, like even a kitchen island. Some people, we need to have a kitchen island. Well, you don't need the kitchen island. Yeah, but it's in every Pinterest image, so we need to have the kitchen island.
I think that's also, if you try to keep to the originality of the house as much as possible, and with being within keeping, then you are going to be timeless. And I think that like we said earlier about a design thread that you can then follow, then you have an authentic theme that runs through the whole house, and stick to that rather than, like you said, just start doing different things in different rooms.
Yeah, there's no coherence to the whole thing. Yeah.
I suppose though, and the sort of the market that you guys are largely all dealing with, and you guys primarily is East London. I guess a fairly high proportion of the homes here are Victorian properties, terraces, or Victorian conversions. So, to a degree, there is sort of like a template there that people see a lot of. So I suppose you sort of maybe can sort of start to understand, I guess, like particular kind of methodologies or like particular sort of layouts that might work, understanding ways of adapting the space without necessarily copying exactly an image that you saw without understanding why the decisions were made.
Yeah, there's definitely design principles that can be used, but even just the orientation of the house, even if it's changed by 30 degrees, can completely change. That window doesn't work there anymore. You know, and if it's not thought about and it's just okay, I like that image and we're going to do the same thing, then sometimes it just needs a little change and it works. But if you don't think about it on that level, then you're not going to know. And it's a lot of money to invest if you're not going to think about it.
But I think it's true of, a kitchen extension is a kitchen extension. But I think what I've started to notice more recently is people are interested in the materials used. And I think that's maybe where you can be a little bit different and creative. It doesn't have to necessarily be with what you touch and what you see. And I think that's an area where the way it's built, what the insulation is, and I think that's probably going to be. I feel that's the market is heading more in that direction. People understanding or wanting to understand, what's the foundation? What is it? Timber? Is it breeze block? And I think that can only really be a good thing. And that, again, plays back into the house's value, because if it's built sustainably and if it's built with care and love and with a thought of the materials, then people will appreciate that more.
Yeah, green credentials is something that's relatively new, and it's something that we didn't see in the past, So using that as a from a selling perspective, using that as a way to sell a home is something that's relatively new, and we're now seeing a desire for that from people. There's a demand for that, which is new that didn't exist before.
Interesting. Have you noticed that more people are quite asking questions?
Yeah, we get a lot of people. I mean, it's one of the key considerations that we have in the initial brief is about sustainability and what do you want to get from it. Some people are just not interested whatsoever, and some people want to be 100%. What can we do? And a lot of the conversations kind of tend back to, let's put solar panels or an air source heat pump and these things. And yeah, they help, and they're kind of, we spoke about earlier, there's a big market for sustainability, and there's lots of companies who've kind of jumped on that they can capitalize on this and they can sell products and they can make money from it. It doesn't mean that putting a solar panel on your house is going to make you sustainable. The biggest thing the biggest polluter in the world, one of the biggest industries is construction. So if you're not thinking about what goes into the ground and the walls and everything, it doesn't matter if you've got a solar panel on it, because it's never going to pay back the carbon that you've lost by building it in the first place. So I think thinking about from the foundations upwards, there's a lot you can change and there's a lot you can do, and it could be where you source the materials and what kind of materials you use, how long they're going to last.
And it becomes a selling strategy. It's going to become more and more prevalent.
And I suppose for you guys as well, sort of trying to kind of, I guess discourage people that are going to come in and maybe just tear out something that's only just been put in must become part of the strategy of being more sustainable, right? Not always just about adding things sustainably, but thinking about what you're taking away, or, like that you're kind of valuing the property that is there and being sold.
Yeah, I think that's super important. But unfortunately, you get people that do work to houses that don't care, like you said. I just want as cheaply and as possible. But I feel like there are materials out there, and there are ways of, okay, maybe not everyone's got the budget to build something completely sustainably, but you can have elements that are truly sustainable, or certain materials that you can thread through into the design.
Are there particular kind of things, Dan, that you sort of advise people when they kind of come to you and say, in addition to the sort of add kit solutions, like kind of adding tech, are there sort of just quite simple and affordable moves that people can make to be more, a little bit more eco-friendly in the choices they make?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I always do is, so if you get a very, very good structural engineer on board, you might pay a little bit more money, but you're going to save on the amount of steelwork and the amount of concrete that's used. And what the cheaper guys do is they oversize everything, then they do one calculation, they know it works. You get the other guys, they'll do 10 calculations and they'll really design it, and you could use half the amount of steel when you're building. So the amount of steel and concrete you've saved in the construction cost already, more so than their fees. and also you're being more sustainable. So, and it makes it easier to design around smaller columns and buildable. And so just from the beginning, using a good engineer is one thing that's really important.
That's great advice, that is.
And then obviously, that's the sort of one that kind of cost balances out. Are there other sort of, well, I guess broadly, can people be eco-friendly on a budget? Like, are sustainable materials more expensive otherwise, or do kind of quite affordable alternatives exist?
No, I mean, again, it comes down to structure in a lot of the part, but using timber's a lot more sustainable than a lot of other materials. You have to use it in the key places where it's not, you're not going to have to replace it in a certain amount of time, so you're not going to use it in the foundations. But if you can use a lot of timber and then clad it, it's a lot more sustainable than using concrete blocks and brickwork. So that's one thing, and it doesn't particularly cost that much more on the scale of an extension. So I think that's a really important thing to think about, is the materials, because I don't think it particularly costs much more money.
And that's where an architect can really help, a good one, and that's there.
Materials. I always find it interesting though how you see lofts being built and they're always made out of timber, but then you see extensions being built and they're hardly ever made out of, well, what I've seen, they're hardly ever made out of timber. I always find that a strange...
And also reusing materials like we spoke about earlier. Sometimes if you're knocking down half of your Victorian house, you might be able to reclaim some of the bricks. This project in particular, we took the bricks and reused them in the extension. If it's a lime mortar, not concrete, it's quite easy to take the bricks out and reuse them. So it's another thing you can do.
And that's something that you as an architect would sort of take into consideration?
Yeah. Yeah, from the beginning we'll say, look, we would really love to reuse the bricks. Maybe we'll have to reclaim a few from somewhere else to kind of make up the numbers, or we hide some ugly ones around the back that don't quite match it. But it's a way of doing it. So
we had a project on the market fairly recently, and they had lamb's wool insulation, and some people loved it. That's because it holds true to, if you believe in that sort of thing as a person, then the house is matching you in other ways as well. And some people absolutely loved it. And from what I know, from what you were saying earlier, lamb's wool was not even that much more expensive than traditional insulation.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's quite nice is that they tell you about this stuff as well, because when you go to sell the house, you can tell that to the people who are going to buy it, and it might really instill, oh, this is a really cool house because it's got X, Y, and Z. And if you didn't know about that, then they're just looking at a house with plasterboard walls, right? So
yeah, well, apparently they can't give it away in the UK, lamb's wool. It's almost like a waste product.
Byproduct,
yeah. No, that's really interesting. So I suppose there's sort of, I guess when you're going through that process, it can just be a case of, right, every material that you're sort of speccing, just thinking, is there a more sustainable version available for a similar price, and just running through that at each sort of step.
It's still in its infancy as well, the industry. They come out with things all the time, and novel materials, and it's really interesting what's going to happen over the next 10 years.
But I think educating people, I think the psychology is, well, I can't afford to be sustainable. It's out of my price range, but I think people need to change and understand that you can even have elements of it now, still on a budget.
Yeah, when you come to resale as well, like you said earlier, when it hasn't been considered, I think it's becoming quite transparent. When people go and look around the house and say, they've just added a box on the back here, and it's not really what they're looking for.
And for you guys, in terms of kind of resale, I mean, are there sort of certain materials that, think are kind of a no-go for people kind of doing renovations and then planning to kind of to sell on that might, are there certain materials that put people off? Or do you think people are just generally interested in, using something, like you say, authentic, whatever it is?
I think anything that you touch and feel, I think it's important that it's good quality. I wouldn't want to comment on specific materials.
For sure.
Definitely old materials, like cladding, pebble, just some forms of pebble dash.
Yeah, I mean, like we had another property that had lime wash floors, and it was beautiful. So there's sort of texture it had to it, and prospective buyers absolutely loved it. So it speaks for itself.
And to keep that in mind, to sort of slightly circle back to what you were sort of saying before, Andrew, when you were sort of saying about someone asking you whether putting in a downstairs WC is going to make a difference to resale value, are there sort of areas of the home that you would recommend people to invest their money in are like certain sort of spaces that tend to kind of, I guess, make a property more sort of sellable further down the line?
Yeah, I was thinking about it. I knew you were going to ask me that question. And I think it depends, a lot of it depends on the house. I think if you live in a 2-bedroom Victorian house with a loft space, then spending the money on the kitchen would make sense to me, kitchen diner, because then someone's buying that home, you're creating a beautiful space downstairs, but they've got the potential to increase its value in the future upstairs, add value. And I think that's really important from a buying perspective. Buyers, you know, are prepared to pay for beautiful homes, but I think there's also an element within us all that you want to make sure that you're future-proofing it and that you can add value. So if you live in a 2-bedroom home with a loft that you can potentially convert, I would do the kitchen diner and extend, and let maybe someone else do the loft. If you're gonna ask me to decide one or the other,
Yeah, sure.
but maybe there's instances where the loft room might make sense. You know, the kitchen may already be of a good size. It might be 2.5 bedrooms, and you think, well, you know, I mean, you can make a 4th bedroom in the loft, and you know, so.
I agree with that, because sometimes we do a house and it's already got 3 bedrooms.
Yeah.
And then they want to add another 2 in the loft, so you got 5 bedrooms, but you still got tiny lounge and tiny kitchen, and it's completely lopsided. You know, no one's going to want to live in that house. Well, they will, but they're not going to say, well, this is a great 5-bedroom house. It's got too many rooms.
I think also the frontage of a house is an area that you can really work on. That really pays dividends exponentially.
Yeah, people ask us all the time, what can I do in my house that's going to have the biggest change in terms of price with the smallest amount of investment, and that's the front of the house. You know,
or flat or.
Yeah.
Can I don't know if I can ask.
Oh yeah, why not?
Absolutely.
A neighbour came to us because we did a renovation a couple of years ago, and the neighbour is trying to sell his house, but asking us what kind of advice. I would say that you can do, you can redo your house, like throw out the kitchen, put a new one in. But I said the number one thing is just to paint the render work on your house, and again, because people discredit it as because why do I want to paint the front of my house? Like, everyone else looks at it, and I never do because I live inside. But actually, when people come to it, it's the first thing you see, and if it's well finished, people immediately think inside people are going to take care. If it looks horrendous, people think automatically there's going to be chronic problems with this house, structural problems, and all sorts of things. So just put a window box, like put a box of flowers on your windowsill. Costs nothing, but it immediately makes the place look well.
And I imagine as well, what you were sort of saying before, Ken, is this idea of bringing sort of joy. Like, yes, like you say, you don't sit and look at the front of your house, but every time you come home, you're arriving and seeing that property. So, right, that's surely going to give you that element of joy every day.
Well, people make a decision on buying a home by just the front. You know, some people walk like, Vic, you go up to the house, this is the one for me, and normally it's a beautiful brick fronted home, and it's to love something that isn't pretty and the frontage is a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, but it's also, we live in such a digital age, and the way people scroll, if that how external image doesn't look, it's just you're going to skip through it. Even if the inside the house is great, sometimes first impressions, unfortunately, in this industry do count.
So it's one of the smallest investments with the biggest return.
Yeah, shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but house.
In terms of planning, as well, if you're doing a house in a conservation area, if you put some landscaping and do up the front, it allows the planner to let you do more stuff at the back, because they see it as an offset. So it's quite a nice thing to do. Because they want the street to look nice. They don't really care about the back.
I imagine there's a few things that kind of come under that banner, like, if you're extending at the back but putting a beautiful green roof on the something, so people are looking out on that as opposed to a tarmac yard, can be beneficial.
Can be really helpful.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Does anyone else have anything to ask our panel? Do you want to introduce yourself first?
My name's Tom. I'm one of the founders of Holt. We make kitchens. And we have a lot of people that come to us who actually, I would say, kind of, a lot of my mates would fall into this category. They come to us with a plan, and the kind of full architectural services are slightly out of budget. And they come to us and they say, I want to do this, this and this, here's the kitchen. And we say, oh, have you just thought about knocking down that wall or just doing that? It'd be really great. And a lot of people have complete sort of inability to kind of know how to go about doing it. And they say, oh, how do you go? And the problem we have is then we don't know what to say to people because it doesn't really, that scope doesn't fall within an architect's scope because it's often too small for an architect to look at. And who does it? And we kind of don't really know where to send people.
That's a great.
And we had one go at doing it ourselves, and it was a disaster.
Yeah.
So we can probably try that for you. But it's when you start to get into party walls, you get into infrastructural engineering, you need to get, and it is more involved than the average homeowner can do, but it falls beneath that remit of a full architectural service, and people fall between the cracks.
And you must have a few people like this, Stan, that sort of that can't necessarily afford to have you project manage the whole build. They kind of just need that sort of that starting.
Yeah,
service.
we offer services where we'll just do design, and we won't, not even the technical design. If you want to go straight to a builder, I wouldn't recommend it. But are we going to add the value that we're going to cost you? And I think there's a threshold of how much a project is for us to not add value. But I think if you're talking about a kitchen, then there's really good interior designers where they'll work with you on the kitchen design and maybe knocking out a few walls and stuff like that. That is more in their remit than adding loads of big extensions and then also looking at the interiors. So I think there's really good interior designers. Roof's one here.
Interior architecture.
Yeah. Maybe this is a good new avenue for you for the business to get an interior designer.
I'm going to add to that.
We've had lots of experience, dealing with interior designs and interior architecture, and it's a lovely process to go through. Similar as it is with an architect, to have someone's years of knowledge and experience. It's brilliant because you see things that necessarily you don't see initially, and especially also with materials as well. We've had that recently with our Hackney refurbishment of the new office with Ruth Milne, who's our interior interior designer, and it's really makes a difference.
Yeah, you go into the process thinking you want one thing, and you think, yeah, that's really good, and then someone comes along and just completely, blows your mind, and you realise that there could be so much more than what you initially thought. But just getting back to your point, a good local builder, basically. I know it's difficult to recommend. We refrain from recommending too many people unless we've got some good, close personal relationships. But a good local builder, and they exist. They are out there. That's the person that you go to initially.
And do you guys also, between you must also, try and kind of connect clients with sort of maybe local makers as well, people like Holstein Kitchens, do you sort of try to kind of offer that service, I guess, it not just kind of, having someone based broadly in London, but maybe specifically kind of close to the area and kind of keeping that business in communities?
Absolutely. When we design something, there's key elements in there that need to be made. So we need to, while we're designing, we need to talk to the person who's going to make it as well. So we need to get quotes, and we need to make sure it fits in with the rest of the design. So yeah, we have people that we use quite regularly, and sometimes it gets changed when you go on site because the builder wants to use someone else. But generally, we try and introduce people to makers and stuff, especially kitchens. We can design a kitchen and use 4 or 5 different people because there might be someone who just does really good doors, someone who does good tops. So we try and do it that way.
I guess that's where sort of working in local market and being a real specialist in residential means that you start to have that knowledge that you can pass on to your clients. Fantastic. Any more questions from the room? Does anyone have anything to ask? If you have another, if you have another, please go ahead.
Well, we sort of talked about sustainability and the appetite for sustainability, and you alluded to the fact that there is an appetite. People are wanting it, but particularly to you, Daniel, actually. Do you think there is a kind of a genuine informed desire to reduce carbon emissions? or is it a kind of, oh, we just like to be a bit sustainable?
There's definitely some people that have that, and you can see it in their whole lifestyle. The car they drive, and the clothes they wear, and lots of different things, what they eat. And then other people is just, maybe they just want to reduce their bills. Maybe they're thinking, well, I've got a life plan and I don't want to have ongoing costs. There's lots of different reasons. So, but the people that generally want to reduce CO2 for the rest of the world is a certain type of person.
I mean, you touched on earlier the sort of, whether you want to add solar panels, all these kinds of, there's so many different ways now to kind of think about energy use. And do you think there's like certain tech that you sort of recommend? Like, do you kind of tend to suggest going for solar? Do you tend to suggest people maybe putting in like home, like battery storage to kind of be, maybe to take advantage of, cheaper rates at night and being able to kind of save their, keep their costs down? Or do you is that sort of an area that you're sort of still kind of getting a feel for?
It depends on the house.
Yeah.
The type of heating system you've got, underfloor heating, radiators, completely different systems with boilers. One won't, an air source heat pump doesn't particularly work well with radiators, but it works really well with underfloor heating. Solar panels, you can use those, but you've got to have the right orientation, otherwise they're not effective. And then battery storage is still quite a new thing, and I imagine that the technology in that's going to get far more advanced, and they're still really expensive at the moment. So would you put one in now, or would you wait 5 years? I don't know. I don't know if I would put one in my house.
Do we have any more questions? Otherwise, I might ask a final one. No? Perfect. Well, I think...
Anything online?
Did you have a question?
Well, it's just a kind of point for Dan, really. I mean, building now is like the most expensive it's ever been.
Yeah.
But I mean, you can see in your designs that you really like work hard to like get every bit out. Like, I'm sure your clients appreciate that, and that's what they want. Is they don't just want like a brick box on the back of their house for like a little kitchen. They want to get the most out of it, and there must be a belief that you're saying like you don't know if the house prices are going to go up, but no one's ever built like nice things in the mid 20th century. Everyone just like subdivided the houses and made them into tenements. But it must be increasing in value. But do you find that planning policy or like government legislation is helping you achieve this, or do you find it actually quite difficult to do good design, or do you think it favours kind of like mass housing?
Depends on the council, doesn't it?
So permitted development rights have definitely given everyone a good. You can add value to your house, and you can add space to your house, and I think the whole thing around that is maybe letting your family grow within your house other than having to keep moving around. So we can extend to the back, we can do loft extensions. They are restricted in the fact that under permitted development, you have to match the materials of the existing house. And there's certain sizes you have to go to, so 3 meters at the back, 6 meters at the back, lots of different rules. What happened earlier this year, though, is in case law, the planners now have to take into consideration, if you put in a planning application, that you could do a certain thing under permitted development. So that was never before. They would just say, well, our policy is you're only allowed to do 2 meters at the back. So now they can say, well, under permitted development, I can go 3 meters at the back. The only reason I'm putting in a planning application is because I want to use timber cladding rather than brickwork. So that's the only thing they should now be considering. So I think it's changing and it's always evolving. And I think the government are trying to overwrite the local authorities, because they don't really want to change. They don't like losing control. I mean, there's certain reasons why that, because they want, the communities and stuff to be nice, and they feel like if there's too many rules, people will take advantage of it. So I think it's a game between the government and the local authorities, and how can we make this work together?
And Dan, do you find in your experience, I mean, kind of been working in and around East London, is there a sort of, do you find like certain kind of boroughs are more open to good design, or sort of more aware of good design than others? You know, are there certain councils that tend to just, you know, have like a checklist, and that they refuse to kind of consider anything that isn't sort of under their sort of specific banner of what they do and don't want?
Yeah, I can see the people who work here laughing because, I mean,
Suggest everyone in the room has had experience of.
we have a better reception. We have a better reception, I feel, with councils that we've done a lot of jobs with, and I think it's just because they've seen the quality of our work. Yeah, but you also sometimes get a planner that takes. So when you put your application, it goes to a particular planning officer, and sometimes they just don't have enough time, and that will be the reason why they reject an application. So unless your case is really on policy and it really fits that, and you can argue that, well, you're going to go to appeal if you reject it, then they've got a reason why they can reject an application. So I think you have to work with an architect or a planning advisor and just make sure that it fits within policy.
And don't let sleeping dogs lie. Always appeal. Basically, that's the kind of
We appeal.
the
quite a
lesson
lot,
there.
so.
Always appeal if you don't get the planning first go.
Sure. Guys, I think we've kind of been chatting for a while, so I think what would be nice to just, before we kind of finish up, is maybe each of you can think of maybe a sort of an end note, maybe sort of a final message to those in the room that are thinking about planning, I don't know, that are buying properties and planning kind of home projects, renovations, extensions, and what message you maybe would have for them. Dan, I'm going to come to you first.
I'd say don't be scared of professionals, that they're going to charge you too much money. Get them involved early on, and talk to a few different ones and see how they feel. Don't always just go straight to a builder because you feel like it's going to be the cheaper option. It's not the case. You can add more value and you can save more money by getting professionals involved.
And those initial conversations they're free, right? You can just you can have a conversation with someone and assess what you might be able to do to help you make the better decision.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Kenny, I'm going to come to you.
What I find quite interesting, what I'd like people to take away from this is that you can do certain things sustainably within a budget. And I think, you know, the more people do that, the cheaper it's going to get, and the more prevalent it's going to be. And that can only be a good thing for everybody involved. So I think anyone who's looking to do something, even if it's under permitted development, there are still ways in which you can make it sustainable and not have to think that I've just got to box bash everything.
Great. And Andrew, I've come to you last. It's always the last, you have to make the final point, but what kind of message do you have?
That's going to sound really cliche. I think pick a good architect. You know, and
also likewise, if you come to sell it, pick a good estate agent.
Basically, yeah. You know, I think
should have said estate agent.
Yeah, you should have done. Yeah,
Sorry.
God, Dan. You know, I think as an estate agent, especially at Stow Brothers, we are more than happy to come around to people's houses and advise them about, you know, the state of their homes now, the potential future value, what they can change. So that discussion we're always happy to have, and we can come at it from a perspective of a reflection of the market. This is what the market's saying at this present moment in time. But, you know, the architect, the one that's going to explore that creativity and help you kind of think outside the box. But as estate agents, we'll be delighted to have those initial discussions with people.
Fantastic. I think that'll be us for today. I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming along and for some great questions. Rees Architects for hosting us here in the studio, and these guys who are in the process of setting up in Hackney. You were established here, but your office is still underway.
Yeah, we've got a site and we're currently doing work. So
fantastic. Coming to Hackney very soon. Thank you so much.
Lovely. Thanks everyone. Thanks for coming. Thank you.